Thank you, Kwanza. Thank you, Jamal, for coming in to talk about your projects and to discuss the importance of your projects and the importance of being a Black creator, Black indie creator, and working in this industry. Kwanza, you had a very successful Kickstarter with Black. And now here we are. You're doing follow ups with it. So, can you pretty much, take us on a quick journey of how you went from concept to Kickstarter to now?
Yeah, I'll try and give the shortest version of that as possible. But
Okay.
essentially, I had started my career like straight out of college working in comics. And part of what inspired me to do that was, having grown up reading them and not seeing, any characters that looked like me until Milestone came on the scene. And that's what really kind of put it into my head that this was a real job that real people could do. But once I had that, you know, job, what I noticed was that there was also a lack of Black people working at these companies. So because there was like a dearth of people with like agency and access to these characters that I grew up like loving and reading, that also kind of led to them being absent in the actual content, so it's like no Black people working there, no Black people in the comic books. So when I left DC, I had this idea for Black like almost 15 years before then, and it just kind of struck me, and my co-creator Tim, like it just kind of struck me like, yo, that story I told you about where only Black people have superpowers, let's do that. let's make a go of it, because times have changed since when I got into the industry, and you had new platforms like Kickstarter, where you didn't really have to go through a publisher if you wanted to put out, content. You could just, you know, validate it, online, like have an audience look at it and tell you whether or not they like the content. So, I came and hit up Jamal. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this comic book. I know that you are a busy man, but like this, I might be onto something here. He agreed. Same thing with like Kari Randolph, who did all of our covers. I was just like, yo, this concept is like, what if only Black people had superpowers? Heads were nodding.
Mhm.
So we came together and put the project out. I think it was 2016. We launched a Kickstarter, and I think we originally asked for like $30,000. We did that in like 3 days, and by the time it ended, we were at 92 and some
Yeah.
change. So yeah.
Let me ask you, was Black inspired by the lack of diversity in the comic book industry, or was it, the need to put out a story like Black, or was it a little bit of mix of both?
There's definitely a mix of both, because those things, are, they share context. And a lot of people thought Black was like, this sort of timely, statement on the Black experience in America at the time. But, these ideas were inspired, for me personally by like, the, death of Amadou Diallo. And like now because of social media, we have sad laundry list of people who have lost their lives to police violence. So it was something that was really a mix of all of those things coming together. My desire to see more characters of color, but also realizing that, you know, there was a story that wasn't being told about characters of color, because you would see them sometimes, but they weren't really being told from a perspective that reflected, you know, real things in our lives. And that's where the best fiction is made, like in my opinion, it's like was when, it has some kernel of like reality in it for you to like build a fantastical narrative around.
All right. Well, that's how we got Black. So in 2019, you kickstarted for White. So how did we go from Black to White? And what are you trying to, give in White that in Black? And what do you want people to get from White?
White takes place 3 years after the events in Black, and it's essentially a reaction to what happens in that story. And in a macro sense, because we did not give ourselves like the label of Black, we did not we might have reappropriated like the Black identity. We might have turned it into like a culture and a badge of honor, but it was not how we defined ourselves. And that's because, you know, the context is some whiteness had to exist in order for blackness to, you know, be positioned as its like opposite. And I felt like I couldn't really tell a story in one beat about black without having like some sort of like reaction to that with white. And so that's kind of the crux of the story. It's like, you know, examining, you know, how white people react to black people getting anything. You know, really, it's like we get a little something and then, you know, they kind of wild out. So that's sort of where that story goes.
And ultimately, if I can jump in, I mean, it really
Yeah, I
is.
was about to ask you a question, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
it really is. Both books really follow who Kareem was and who he's slowly becoming over the course of both books. So, you know, when we meet Kareem in Black, he's just being brought into this world. He's just starting to find out about his power and his agency. So when we get to White, he's feeling his oats a little bit. Like he's like that close from wilding out a couple of times. You know, he's definitely, there's a method to his madness, but he's also like,
he's flexing a little bit.
Yeah, he's flexing, but you know, the white guys are flexing back now. You know, they've upped the ante from the first book. So, you know, like Kwanzaa said, that's the reaction. We're getting the action versus the reaction from both sides of the spectrum.
What do you think? What was your first reaction, Jamal, when you read the script or you heard at least the outline and idea of White?
Of White. Well, you know, when I got the first script, it was just like, because you have to, for me, because there was a year in between doing Black and doing White, doing the first Wrong Earth series. And, you know, so I had to sort of reset my brain to tackle those characters, but the characters all had their own moments of growth. And like I was just saying about the story, Kareem is not the same Kareem that he was in Black. You know, he's, you know, older, a little bit more mature, a little bit more focused. You know, he knows what he can do physically. He knows what his power set is. You know, he takes advantage of it. You know, he is definitely, he is the hero. You know, and he feels like the hero, even though, you know, he's bumping up against the authorities, both inside the project and outside the project. So
what do you go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask you both, how do you respond to, you know, there was this big issue with Comic-Gate, and there's like this very loud fandom that is tired of reading about race and identity in comics. How do you respond to their criticisms with Black and White?
They should have stopped reading comics in 1961, because because race and identity have existed in, you know, from, you know, the end of the golden age all the way through today. Some of the best comics that have been done are filled with identity politics. I mean, you know, it's a stupid argument.
I think it's a disingenuous argument too, because the issue the issue that they bring up is that the identity politics were done in through a white lens and a framework that they felt comfortable with. And the minute you tell a story that doesn't have that, then they start getting out of pocket, you know. And it's just, and it's something where, even though there's like, you know, millions of comics that they could be reading, you know, that scratch that itch for them, they feel a need to come after us because like in the comic book, we can't have nothing. Get a little something, and then they start pushing back. And it's kind of ridiculous because, I'm like, it doesn't play exactly, but I always like the like phrase, the turn of phrase with like, Jay-Z talking about people who like his old music. He's like, you like my old music, buy my old albums. If that's the Jay-Z you want to hear, they there,
Right.
go listen to that. And that's the same with comics. It's like, hey, if you want to read like, 90s roided up, like multi-pocket gun-toting comics, Rob Liefeld's got you covered.
Oh yeah,
Like, go
absolutely.
read his stuff.
He's still making
But
them.
yeah. So it's like you're not at a loss of material or content that you want to consume. So you're going out of your way to come after us and tell us, that something we're doing is, I don't even want to use the word wrong because it's not, it's just
No,
like,
but and at the same time, I also feel like whenever these arguments come up, they're waxing nostalgically for older comics or the way things they thought older comics were being done, but they're a lot of times they're misremembering or didn't understand the context of half the stuff that they were reading. So if you go back and you look at like a lot of the comics that they were reading in like the 80s and the 90s, they are rife with political thought and, for lack of a better term, left-wing politics and morality play and everything else. I was just rereading Squadron Supreme by Mark Grunwald, and it is filled with politics. I mean, Kyle Richmond, Nighthawk, is the president of the United States. He has to step down because the world he allowed the Squadron Supreme allowed the world to be taken over by a villain who is controlling their minds. So in reaction, what do? They decided they're going to create a utopia by any means necessary, including, mind-wiping criminals and changing their personalities and forcing them to be good. And it's all the book talks about is the implications of doing this at all. Not only that, but it talks about, like trying to cure cancer and the failure to cure cancer and the guilt and involved and just it's super political.
But you know what though, Jamal, there was something different about that. Like the whole squadron were white people.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it was all good. Like,
you guys are funny. Let me ask you, when you came up with Black, were you making Black for you or were you making Black for a specific audience? Was it more self-serving, like this is your story, you want to write it, and you just hope others enjoy it? Or were you in the mind frame of, I know there's people that want to read this?
I always write it for myself first, or else like I'm just not going to get into it. Like I still try to, find that joy in the work where I'm like having fun and I'm writing something that like, I can get into and stuff like that. And I hope that people resonate with it because I feel like that's always been the intent of all of my favorite like creatives is they make stuff and then, if it speaks to me, that's great. And we're like on the same wavelength, it's like we're riding that same wave. But while I did it for the culture in a aspirational way, like there was also the possibility that it wouldn't hit, and then nobody likes it, and that's just where you at, and that's fine, It's like, but I always start with making it for myself, but there's definitely like the intent that other people respond to what I was talking about because I was trying to tell stories that reflected my experiences, those of people in my family, my friends, how I grew up and like how I saw the Black experience and then try to interpret it through a bunch of different perspectives, so it's not just like my lens, it's like through a bunch of different lenses so that the characters could hold those positions as well.
Now I have to ask you the $1 million question. How did you not have a successful Kickstarter, not once, but twice. How are you doing it? How are you meeting your goals? How are you surpassing your goals within days of launching? What's the magic?
That I cannot tell you other than just having like a really dope team supporting me. That helps a lot. Not doing it like, on your own and stuff like that, and working with people who I really not only respect personally, but I just enjoy working with because I love seeing what they put out. Like, and I think other people do too. So, when you're putting together a Kickstarter and, it's like, four black guys who if could put out a comic book, then I think that's what resonates with people, and then the concept itself. So it's just like, we're not playing.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to bring something, we're trying to put together something good.
But and from a standpoint of putting together the campaign as well, like Kwanzaa went in with full gusto, was very organized, knew exactly what to do, who to talk to about getting publicity early on. That helped a lot as well. So
That's true. I mean, yeah. I mean, we worked with David Hyde at like Superfan, like, and he helped, navigate us in terms of like getting press, responding to press. Like, he just guided us through all that on both projects, and then a lot of social media. Because God, man, Kickstarters, they'll wear you out. Like, you
yes,
you
they
you
do.
have to be
Yes, they do.
on for like basically 30 days or however long you're running your campaign. But that's a big part of it. And then, you know doing a little bit of like, advertising and stuff through social too. Like, the first one, I did a lot of targeted ads, and I was actually kind of mad that like Facebook, buckled under the pressure to take away ad targeting for specific demographics, because I'm like, but I want black people to see my ads. Like, that's who I want. And they're just like, well, we can't do it by race, we have to do it by affinity. And I'm just like, okay, but like, I want black people. Like, I don't like so. But that was very helpful.
So you have black, you have white. What's next?
Well, this year finally, two of the books that are interstitials between black and white, Devil's Die and Widows and Orphans, are finally coming out in trade. So you'll be able to get those. I think they're up for pre-order right now on Amazon and at the Black Mass Studios store. So those are some stories that kind of, the way I describe it is, they're sort of like the Rogue One or Solo in the trilogy. So they're like little stories that focus on specific characters from like the first book.
Who are some people you were surprised that were fans of black?
Dennis Cowan. That, like, the Milestone founders have always been like my like absolute heroes, and I met him at San Diego, in the before times, and I introduced myself, and he immediately knew me, like he knew my work, and that just like that I can't even describe how good that felt. That just felt good.
That's really cool. What are your goals for the rest of the year? Like, do you plan to do anything other than black or in the black universe? Or are you interested in doing something different? Or are you going to kind of like regroup and think about another project and get to writing?
Well, I was hired by Humanoids, this one of the biggest publishers in France, to create a line of comics for them called H1 Comics, and those three books came out last year: Ignited, Omni, and Strangelands. So essentially, I helped them kind of construct, the landscape and the Bible for like how that world would work. And I wrote their flagship title, Ignited, with Mark Wade. And that was really fun. And Omni's still cooking too, which is actually my personal favorite. I don't write that book,
Yeah,
but
I absolutely love that book.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad. But she's the character who's like nearest and dearest to my heart, and I'm glad that people are really vibing with that. So that stuff came out. The rest of the stuff, I'm cooking up some other stuff now that I can't really talk about. But I'm definitely like focused on like wrapping up Black at some point in the future. So like there will be the third volume that sort of finishes it off, and then I don't know, maybe then I can finally like pass the reins on to like some other people and just be like, all right, go play in the sandbox now. I don't know, like have fun.
Jamal, how are you going to feel when Black finally wraps up?
I don't know actually. um, I always joke that, you know, when it comes to Black, Kwanzaa and Tim are John and Paul, and I'm Ringo. You know, I'm there to keep the beat. You know, sing an occasional song, that sort of thing. So, it'll, you know, I am looking forward to seeing how everything wraps up. You know, we leave Kareem in a very interesting place at the end of White. Can't really go into any details, but yeah, so I'm curious as a reader. I'm curious to see where things end up.
Is there artistically, what did you think was, you know, new to Black that you haven't had a chance to do with any other work before?
Oh, I think more than anything else, like with Black, because we were doing in black and white with gray tones, I decided to sort of, you know, re-embrace the things that I love about manga, especially like Ryoichi Kagami and Katsuhiro Otomo and Masume Shiro, and try to incorporate that kind of feel, mix that kind of feel with what I do into the storytelling on the series. So, you know, there's more speed lines and more, you know, explosive lines, and it's definitely different than what I do on a book like The Wrong Earth, for example, or what I did on Supergirl. It's a different feel I'm trying to give to the Black universe. And, you know, a lot of that has been translating Tim's designs and, you know, trying to make that meld between the two of us be as successful as possible. And I think part of that also is that because of the way that we were working on White, I had a lot more, I think even more freedom in terms of like the overall storytelling than I even had on the first book. So I think it's given it a different kind of energy.
How did Kwanzaa approach you to work on Black?
He came over to my house. He called me up. He said he had this project that he wanted to pitch, and I invited him and Tim over. Tim was running late. Kwanzaa came over, and he pulled out his phone, and he showed me this image, and it was just that image of Kareem in the hoodie against a red background, and above his head it just said, "What if only Black people had superpowers?" I was just like, God damn it. I don't know if I said that out loud, but I definitely said that in my head. I was just like, okay, I got to do this now. It's just, it's sometimes when, for me, I've had the best success when somebody has pitched to me a concept that makes you go, why didn't anybody think of this before? Or if they did think of this, why didn't they do it? You know, and it really was that simple. I knew, that's the thing is I knew from the outset also how much flack we were going to get from certain corners. And I embraced that. I knew going into it that, you know, I mean, they weren't Comicsgate at the time, but, you know, that was they were, you know, well, having been involved with things that shouldn't have been controversial, but ended up being controversial over the course of my career, you get a sense for that kind of thing. You can smell it coming. So you either run from it or you run towards it. I decided to run towards it. And, you know, here we are, 4 years later. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Would you consider Black radical?
No, because we're telling a story. I don't, you know, telling stories shouldn't be radical. I mean, I think what the radical part is that, you know, there isn't more material, you know, that has, you know, a Black or Afrocentric focus, or if there is, it's ghettoized, for lack of a better term. It's pushed off to the side because mainstream publishers, for the most part, are scared of alienating, you know, the guys in the Midwest that they used to think were the only ones buying books, and still kind of, you know, focus their attention in that direction. I mean, it's changing now, or at least they're trying. You have younger people coming into the industry trying to make those changes, which is a wonderful thing. Not just in terms of characters of color, but characters of different genders and sexualities and proclivities, and, you know, and everything else. You know, that, you know, opening up that spectrum shouldn't be radical, but unfortunately for some people, it still is. You know, if this past week has shown us anything, is that there is a angry contingent out there that is afraid that what they consider to be normal, you know, straight white, you know, cisgender,
Christian.
whatever, Christian. Well, not always Christian, but most, you know, there's a good portion of it.
Christian on Sundays.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, that are afraid that the world is being taken away from them. The world's not being taken away from them. You know, we're not taking anything away from them. We're 13% of the American population. We're not taking anything. You know, we just want our stories to be out there.
Which is interesting, considering, like, you know, anytime we've ever made our voice heard, we weren't ever taking anything, but this past week shown us who takes stuff. Just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Capitals, land, people.
I'm just saying, I would not have been able to walk out with Speaker Pelosi's lectern and smile for a camera without getting shot.
You wouldn't have been able to walk in. What are we talking about?
That's true too.
You wouldn't have seen the lectern. None of that would have happened. Been a wrap.
That's very true. So Jamal, how do you bounce from, you know, something like Black to The Wrong Earth?
You know, they're two very different types of books. You know, they're both grounded in their own realities, but Black, you know, like I was saying before, you know, Black is sort of my callback to manga, to the things that I like about manga visually. Whereas with The Wrong Earth, I'm trying to design different worlds and different realities that are similar but very distinct from each other. Where, you know, even down to how I draw Dragonfly Man and Dragonfly are very much, you know, Dragonfly, the way that I draw him visually, I'm taking a lot from like Jim Lee and Greg Capullo, and doing a much more hatch work and a much more scrappier style, and, you know, angle, you know, sharp angles and everything. With, you know, and then with Dragonfly Man, it's much more rounder and softer and more naturalistic, and, you know, then designing, vehicles and weapons and headquarters, and, trying to maintain the aesthetic of both sort of like a pseudo like Batman 66 Green Hornet, kind of universe, as opposed to, something more akin to, modern comics or modern, vigilante superhero comics, that sort of thing. So it's, it's the melding of the two. And then, there's also the way that the stories are told, with, in terms of layout, where with the Earth Alpha or the Dragonfly Man scenes up until a certain point, it's very much classic, like Neil Adams, who's Carmine Infantino, sort of like characters popping out of panels, and heads and circles, and a much more like traditional like Silver Age structure, as opposed to when you get to the Earth Omega scenes and everything is letterbox and Brian Hitch and Frank Quitely, and very staid, very few panels in those scenes overlap. It's all very much stays within that grid. And then with the new series, I've decided to do something even different, because they moved to another Earth, and I'm doing different things visually with the panel borders, and there's like yeah, it's hard to explain, but it's, the panels have borders on them, but they also, like, the background of the panels is all circuit boards. So it's it's visual. The visual cues are different, as opposed to what
you were talking about, how you're able to kind of like multifunction and work on different projects that are completely different and opposite of each other.
Yes.
I want to know, a lot of, aspiring comic book writers, one of their major obstacles outside of being funded is finding an artist. How does a writer find an artist? Like, how does a relationship form, and what is the ideal relationship between writer and artist?
I'd like to hear Jamal's perspective, because from a writer's perspective, it's just begging. Like, please, please, write a comic, please.
It really depends. I mean, with Kwanzaa, it's a different situation, because even prior to this, we worked together at DC. He was my editor on a couple of projects, on Smallville and on The Ray. So we knew each other like through other people before then. So we already had an established relationship. That's an interesting question, because I don't know even know if I'm the right person to answer that question, really, because a lot of the work that I've gotten, I would even say for like the past decade, has been based off of previous relationships with like editors and writers, the writers that I've known. Occasionally I'll get approached about doing something, and working with a writer really is about trusting them, in all facets, because ultimately it is a business transaction. So you have to know that the writer you're working with is going to be at least somewhat reliable, on their end. But you also have to be, as a writer, you also have to be realistic with yourself about what you are able to do in terms of the project, and if you're financing it as well, what you can afford to pay. I always say that, especially with a young writer, this is gonna kind of sound a little mean, but you got to stay in your lane. you know? And I don't just mean like young, like by in terms of age. Like if you are an inexperienced comics writer and say you decide, oh, I want to write a comic book. I'm not the guy that you come to try to get your first comic book done.
Okay, what about second comic book?
Well, okay, no. Here's the thing. Just from my perspective, I've been writing and drawing comic books for 30 years. I've worked with everybody at this point. I've worked with Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, Kwanzaa, Osajyefo.
Oh,
I'm working with Tom Payer. I've got stuff popping. I'm doing Superman with Philip Kennedy Johnson right now. Like and I'm a writer and a former editor, and I've worked the business side of the industry. So if you come to me and you don't know what you're talking about, that's going to lessen my feeling of trust in you that you're going to be able to produce this project. And I need to be able to feel like I can trust you. If you're a new writer, work with somebody who's just as hungry as you are, who's not, this is how I make my living. And not for nothing, Kwanzaa can tell you, I'm not cheap.
So people don't get it. It's like, I'm buying time, y'all.
Exactly. So if you're going to approach an artist, and I'm going to put myself in the mindset of 22-year-old Jamal. If you're going to approach Jamal as a 22-year-old, you need to be able to put something on the table. And I need to know that you can carry your load. If this is your project, but there's not a lot of money in it, offer me something else. Offer me a stake in the property. Outline it. Make sure that that's part of the contract. Make sure there's a contract. Make sure that it's not a flimsy contract. Make sure that the duties and responsibilities of each member of your creative team is outlined completely in the contract. I don't like surprises. If you tell me we're going to be partners in this and you need me to do X, Y, and Z, make sure it's in black and white. Make sure that it's there. And if it's going to be a partnership, it has to be a full partnership. It can't be just you barking out orders and dictating what you want and expecting me to do it, especially if you're not paying me, or you're paying me like $35 a page or something. There has to be that level of trust there. Now, if you decide that you're brawly and you're coming at 48-year-old Jamal with everything, wanting everything that comes with that, you're paying for not just my skills and my abilities. You're paying for 30 years of experience. You're paying for a 30-year reputation that I've worked very hard to build, and a visible public presence that I have in this industry after such a tenured career. So you have to really make it worth my while, or you have to dazzle me. And if you can do both, you're golden. But you got to come, with either the greatest story in the world or something that I feel like I can work with, or, just You know, put some dollars on the table, and you know, but you know, you got to stay in your lane. If you know you can't afford a Jamal Igle, you know, but you can afford a kid just out of art school who's just looking to get a break, who's just wants to do his own thing, or somebody, again, you find somebody who thinks like you do and wants to put out this project, and you guys come up with the next, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, just, two guys sitting in your apartment, putting something together, banging it out, but, if you're just getting started, that's how you do it. You find somebody who is willing to work with you. If you're, I don't really know how else to kind of put it. It's, there's so many different factors that are involved in making a creative decision. When you're picking projects, when you're picking between projects, that really has to factor into it. That trust has to factor into it. For me, at least, I have to know that the people that I'm working with are going to do things correctly, because I've been burned in these situations before. I don't like being burned. It makes me very cranky.
I understand. What artists, and specifically what Black artists, do you admire, Jamal and Kwanzaa?
Oof. Okay, you got Dennis Cowan, you got Larry Stroman, you got Brian Stelfreeze, you got Jason Pearson, you got Dexter Vines. In terms of colors, you got Andrew Dahlhouse. Oh my God. Jamal Campbell. Jamal Campbell is doing such phenomenal work on Far Sector. It is insane. I don't even know how he gets as much work done as Valentine Delandro, Sean Pryor. I mean, there's too many people. Like, it really is.
Yeah, I think for me, my list isn't as long, not because I don't have one, but because Jamal named everybody already. But I've always been a big admirer of Brandon Thomas, and like that guy is a champion writer, and I'm glad to see that he's finally getting some mainstream love again. Because he's been fired for a while, and like whatever opportunities have not been in his lap, I'm glad to see it, because he always writes stuff that makes me go like, all right, bet. Like, I like his writing because it makes me want to write stuff, or just like very like, at least from my end, it's a very like Naruto Sasuke kind of thing, or just like, oh, okay, you just got the Rinnegan now, right? All right, I'm gonna go train. You just gonna come out with some excellence, okay?
Oh man. Now, in terms of writers, I mean, there's some Jeffrey Thorne is doing some kick-ass stuff. Brian Hill is doing some great stuff over at DC right now. I mean, Vita Ayala, Danny Lord, they're doing great stuff. I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches in terms of talent in this industry.
For the people who are watching right now or who are listening, what do you want them to know about being a Black creator and working in this industry? What advice would you give them that no one gave you, that you had to learn on your own?
Patience. I had to learn to be patient, to be honest, and not because of outside forces. More, I had to learn to be patient with myself, because especially when I was younger, I was, as we often are, far too arrogant for the level of skill that I had at the time. I was not quite as good as I thought I was. but I was also probably in a lot of ways better than I needed to be. But I needed to learn how to be patient with myself, because I would get really, really frustrated because it didn't feel like I was getting the opportunities that I deserved. Not that I don't think anybody really deserves opportunities. You work for opportunity. You work for opportunity. Or at least that's how I feel like it. Like you know, nobody's gonna hand you anything. You know, you just, you know, you gotta just show and prove and keep showing and proving, and eventually people start to really take notice. So, and hopefully, and eventually the right people take notice. You know, but I had to learn to be patient with myself. I had to learn to be patient with. I had to learn to embrace what I could do at the time, and build on whatever lessons came out of it. If there were things that I felt like I wasn't doing quite as well, you know, I would take the opportunity on the next book to try to make changes, to adjust, to rethink how I tackled a face or a panel or a layout or whatever. And, you know, also I had to learn to be patient with other people in terms of letting people offer me advice as well, which I had a real problem with for a very long time, because I had gotten it into my head, or I had let people drill it into my head, that everybody was, you know, that not everyone had my best interests at heart. And the thing about it that I discovered over the years is that if you give people in this industry, especially, an opportunity, they are some of the nicest, warmest, most considerate people in the world. Like genuinely self-effacing, you know, genuine, honest, and sincere. Like a lot of the people that I've met in this business are just incredibly sincere. Like they've taken the superhero lessons to heart. You know?
What about you, Kwanzaa?
I think piggybacking off of that, yeah, patience is definitely like key, because you know I think there's one thing that we've always known in the comics industry is like you got to do your 10 years minimum. You got to do your decade. You know, there's so many people who like you knew them when they was making like indie photocopy comics in Greenpoint, you know, having an indie con and a busted old, like Jamal's laughing because you know, man, you know how we used to do.
Oh, absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
Like, and they you didn't know them until 10 years later, you know, and then even then, you're springboarding after that grind that you just did to get here.
Yeah.
To the next 10 years. So it's a marathon, and you have to be doing comic books because you love it first and foremost, because it's not going to love you back like that.
Oh yeah.
At least not financially on the upfront, and not like, you know, you're not just going to rocket star into fame because nobody ever has. I don't think I know too many people in comic books who just came out the gate. You know, there's not a lot.
No.
You know, and I think people see where people are now and don't realize that, like, nobody know who Neil Gaiman was until Karen Berger put him on. You know, like he was just, you know, Neil.
Yeah.
You know? Like that's all that's it. You know, it's like, so you know, he had a passion for it and a dedication and a love for it that, you know, came through in his work. And that's what got him to where he was. So I think that's the biggest amount of advice I could give to people. It's like, it's not about, I mean, have your goals in mind, where you want to be, or what you want to see a project become, put that into your work. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you're not doing it because you love it, probably not cut out for this. To be honest, like that.
Yeah, it's a hard business. It's grueling. It's time consuming. you know, you spend months, sometimes years working on a project that, you know, people, you know, it'll take forever for people to see. You don't know how people are going to react. You know, you're putting your heart on your sleeve in a lot of ways, and you know, you're exposing, you know, you're exposing yourself, you know, creatively to a world that can be cruel and can be harsh and very judgmental at first. You know, and like Kwanzaa was saying, it's I always I find it funny when I think back on it now. Like, I think a perfect example of you never know who's going to blow up is somebody like Raina Telgemeier. I used to see Raina at the Puck Building at the Mocha Art Fest, like way back in the day, and then suddenly she's like the biggest, you know, selling graphic novelist in the industry right now. Like, you don't know people don't know the grind. Like, people, you know, people don't know how much work you put in before you even got to the main stage. Yeah, it's like my favorite quote is from James Earl Jones, where he says it took him 15 years to become an overnight success.
Yep.
And that's basically what it comes down to. It all comes down to being patient and, you know, biding your time and putting in the grind.
Wow, this has been really informative. I really appreciate you both being so blunt and honest. I think a lot of times aspiring creatives, you know, they have like this idea what success looks like, and some people tend to not, you know, be as forthcoming with the truth on how to be successful, not just this industry, but in all industries in general, you know? So I think that's important to keep in mind when you are pursuing creative goals. I really appreciate this talk. Thank you so much, y'all. This is really informative. Thank you.
Oh, no problem, Erika.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, send these links and, you know, just CC me, and anything I can provide further, I can do. I can put the graphic on my social media when it goes live. I'm not sure if it's going to go live Saturday or Sunday, but when it goes live, I'll definitely spread it across social media.
All right, cool.
All right, cool.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
You too.
You too.
All right.